I started this channel with a feeling that I wanted to evoke, a feeling that I used and still use to fill a void that I can't really quite express. I tried to explain it, tried to describe what the feeling is or why I have it, but I think honestly it's just from being a human being. We are animals that skyrocketed through evolution before we had a chance to truly change. I think we need to feel fear. I think we need to feel that hollow dread deep in our stomach. Life has two sides, and I think a lot of us only live in the above, in the light, leaving the below as a dark underworld that day to day we do not venture into. But take my hand, we're going in together.
I'm at the corner.
You can shut the car off and give me your license, registration, and insurance, please.
On the night of August the 4th, 2021, a police officer in North Bergen, New Jersey, noticed a car moving too fast through the streets. Officer John Nunez activated his lights and pulled the vehicle over. Inside the car were two young people. There was 24-year-old Luis Fernando Cavalos. He was the driver. In the passenger seat was his date, 27-year-old Alexis Rodriguez. According to police, the two of them had spent the evening together, and this was their first date. As the officer approached the vehicle, his body cam recorded the entire interaction. Louis handed over his license and registration, and someone else could be heard complaining about how fast the car had been traveling. When asked about the speeding, the couple admitted that they were in a hurry. Rodriguez, the passenger, apologized. She told the officer that she needed to get home quickly.
Just gotta let you know everything's being audio video recorded, right?
Yeah.
The reason for this...
The thing is, the car is new, so I don't really have a registration.
You have the temporary one that they give you with the template.
Yeah, and
so that's your registration, right?
Yeah.
The reason for yours...
That kid was speeding so bad, he almost hit another kid in a bike.
I know. That's why I stopped him.
Another one? You almost hit me too.
Ma'am, that's why I stopped him. Have a nice night, okay? Yeah, that's what I'm stopping you for. Reckless driving, careless driving, speeding, and the lights you ran, okay? You were doing at least 100 on Kennedy Boulevard. All right, man? You almost struck my car because I was making a right turn. All right?
Officer Nunez tried to lighten the moment with a warning. He told them, almost killing each other is no way to start on the first date.
I know.
It's my fault. It's really my fault. I swear.
It's not your fault because if
No,
he gets
it
into an
is.
accident, it's his fault.
No, it's my fault.
Listen,
'cause I was
you're getting 3 tickets. I could have given you a lot more, okay? You're not even supposed to be driving at this time because you have a provisional license.
Oh my God.
So
it's
you're
my
getting
fault.
reckless. I didn't give you speeding. I'm giving you that break, all right?
It's my fault.
You got reckless, the traffic light that you ran, and for driving after hours. All right, man?
Louis was issued 3 citations: reckless driving, failure to observe a flashing traffic signal, and violating restrictions on a provisional license. After the ticket was written, the officer told them to drive safely, and then they left. This entire interaction lasted only a few minutes, and then, just 14 minutes later, a call came across police radio. There had now been a serious crash nearby.
Yo, this is the same kid. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
When Officer Nunez arrived at the scene, he immediately recognized the vehicle. Body camera footage captured his reaction. The Kia had collided with another vehicle at high speed. This impact tore the roof from the car. Louis was 24, Alexis was 27. Their time on this earth had come to an end. Their first date ended like this. On the afternoon of February the 24th, 2004, a man sat quietly in the garden of a house in Cloten, Sweden. He had travelled across Europe to be there. In his pocket was a photograph. It showed his wife and 2 children. 2 years earlier, the people in that photograph had boarded a flight that never arrived. When the homeowner stepped outside, the visitor stood up. What happened next would transform one of aviation's most tragic accidents into, well, let's find out together. On July 1st, 2002, 2 aircrafts crossed paths in the night sky over southern Germany. One was Bashkirian Airlines Flight 2937, a Tupolev passenger jet flying from Moscow to Barcelona. On board were 69 people. 46 of them were school children traveling to Spain on a holiday trip. The second aircraft was DHL Flight 611, a Boeing cargo jet flying from Italy towards Belgium. Inside a control center in Zurich, a single air traffic controller was managing the airspace. His name was Peter Nielsen. Due to maintenance work and staffing shortages, Nielsen was handling 2 workstations at once. Several safety systems were also temporarily offline. At 23:30 local time, both aircraft were flying at the same altitude, flight level 360. This is 36,000 feet above the ground. These planes were on a collision course. Less than a minute before impact, the onboard collision avoidance system issued a command. The Russian aircraft was instructed to climb, but almost immediately afterwards, the controller issued a different instruction. He told the pilots to descend. The crew followed the instructions of the controller. At the same time, the cargo plane received the opposite command from its own system. Its pilots began descending. Now, both aircraft were moving directly towards each other. Seconds later, the pilot saw the aircraft approaching through the darkness, but it was already far, far too late. At 23:35, the tail of the Boeing sliced directly through the Tupolov's fuselage. The passenger plane broke apart mid-air. Wreckage and bodies rained down across fields near the town of Überlingen. All 71 people across the 2 aircraft met their end. Among them were the wife and 2 young children of a Russian architect named Vitaly Kaloyev. Vitaly traveled to Germany to search the crash site himself. He found fragments of wreckage scattered across the countryside. At one point, he discovered a broken pearl necklace, and he knew instantly that it belonged to his daughter. Later, devastatingly, he then located her body under a tree. The branches had slowed her downwards journey enough that she was perfectly intact, laying on the floor, but no longer breathing. In an instant, his family was now gone. Vitaly was alone in the world. Friends said that the loss destroyed him. He spent months just sitting beside the graves of his family. But over time, his grief became focused on one person. That was the air traffic controller who had been working alone that night, Peter Nielsen. Vitaly Kaloyev wanted an apology. He asked the air traffic control company for a meeting, but those requests were repeatedly denied, and that meeting never happened. A man that loses everything has nothing left to lose, so Vitaly hired a private investigator to find Nielsen's home address. He then made the decision to travel to Switzerland. On February 24, 2004, Vitaly Kaloyev arrived at Peter Nielsen's home in the town of Kloten. A neighbor saw him waiting in the garden, holding a piece of paper with Nielsen's name on it. When Nielsen returned home, he went outside to confront the stranger. His children were nearby in the home. Just moments later, screams were heard. Vitaly attacked Nielsen with a sharp implement. Nielsen's time on this earth then came to an end in front of his family. Vitaly was arrested shortly afterwards. In court, he said that the crash had ended his life. He was then sentenced to prison, but it was only for 8 years. And then, after serving just 3.5 years, he was released. When he returned to Russia, crowds greeted him as a hero. Deep inside a remote forest in North Wales, a woman walking her dog made a discovery that she did not expect. Hidden among the trees was a complete human skeleton. It appeared to have been there for years, but one detail immediately stood out. It was still handcuffed to a tree. I hate this story so much. The remains were discovered in April of 2005. A local resident named Jennifer Houston had been walking her dogs in Clocaenog Forest in Denbighshire, North Wales. At some point during the walk, she became lost. Whilst trying to find her way out of the trees, she noticed something unusual, roughly 200 yards inside the woodland. This was the skeleton. Police were called to the scene. Investigators quickly noticed that the handcuffs were still attached to the skeleton. Because of that detail, the case was treated as suspicious. Detectives considered the possibility that a person had been restrained by someone else. Another early theory was that the remains could have belonged to an escaped prisoner, but the investigation soon uncovered a clue that changed the direction of the case. Among the few belongings found nearby was a small key fob. When police traced it back to its owner, they were able to identify the man. His name was Richard John Sumner. Richard Sumner was 47 years old when he disappeared. He lived in Crosby, Merseyside. Early in his life, he had built a career as a scenic artist, creating stage designs for opera productions at the Glyndebourne Festival. Family members described him as intelligent and talented, but his life was plagued by a cruel force. In 1984, Richard was diagnosed with schizophrenia. As the illness progressed, he was eventually forced to stop working. According to his sister, Patricia Jones, that loss affected him deeply. Richard now often spoke about feeling like a burden on his family. He really disliked relying on financial support and benefits. Over time, his depression only worsened. Family members had told investigators that Richard had spoken openly about wanting his time on this earth to end. I can feel that hollow feeling in my gut only growing. Years before his disappearance, Richard had developed a strange and dangerous ritual. He would travel to wooded areas and then handcuff himself to a tree. He would keep the key about his person so that he could retrieve it when he changed his mind, and every time he did eventually grab that key. In 1996, one attempt left him restrained for 4 days before he finally made the decision to free himself. Another attempt happened in 1999. Then, just 1 week before he vanished in March 2002, Richard travelled to that same forest in North Wales and repeated the act. On that occasion, he managed to release himself again. According to his sister, he changed his mind because he did not want to upset his family. But when Richard returned to the forest in March of 2002, something was different. When investigators examined the scene years later, they noticed several unusual details. The handcuff still attached to Richard was positioned higher than expected, closer to the forearm rather than tightly around the wrist. There were also deep scuff marks carved into the bark of the tree. Home Office pathologist Dr. Brian Rogers reviewed the evidence. He told the inquest that these marks strongly suggested that Richard had struggled against the restraint. In other words, it is very possible that Richard was trying to break free. But let's pause for a second. Why didn't Richard just use the key to release himself like every other time? And, well, when the keys to the handcuffs were eventually located nearby, it was positioned just far enough away that they could not be reached, meaning that if Richard had changed his mind, there would be no way to unlock the restraint. We will never know whether he dropped or fumbled the key, knocking it just out of reach, whether he made the decision to throw the key and then regretted it, be that in minutes, hours, or days. We don't know if he struggled to be free, as the damage to the tree suggests. Whether this time going into the forest was supposed to be the same as all the others. Whether Richard wanted to walk back out, but the decision was taken out of his hands. The thirst, the hunger, the cold, the agony, the feelings of regret and hopelessness. How many sunsets, sunrises did he see looking up through the canopy before his time was eventually up? Because only skeletal remains were recovered, doctors could not determine exactly how Richard's time came to an end. The inquest therefore returned what is known as an open verdict. This means the circumstances of what happened in the forest at that tree cannot be proven, and they never will. One man in the entire history of the universe knows exactly what happened, and that private moment is his to keep. On December the 4th, 2016, a bride in Brazil was on her way to her own wedding. However, she did not want to arrive in the way that everyone expected. The bride was Rosemary do Nascimento Silva. She was 32 years old. She lived in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And on that December afternoon, she was about to marry her fiancé, Udale Damasceno. Rosemary had planned something truly unforgettable. Instead of arriving by car, she would arrive by helicopter. The plan had been a complete secret. Even her fiancé didn't know. The aircraft lifted off, and on board were 4 people. There was Rosemary, her brother Silvano Nascimento da Silva, the pilot Peterson Pinheiro, and photographer Nayla Cristina Neves, who was 6 months pregnant. The flight was supposed to take around 15 minutes, just enough time to reach the wedding, just enough time to reveal the perfect surprise. The camera inside the helicopter captured the early moments of the flight. Rosemary sat beside her brother. She was smiling, and at one point she gently held onto his arm. Outside the window, the landscape moved past smoothly, but as the helicopter moved closer to its wedding destination, the conditions quickly began to change. Fog started forming around the aircraft. Visibility dropped. As we can see in the video, the horizon disappears. The helicopter appeared to enter a cloud of thick white mist. Inside the aircraft, alarms suddenly began to ring. The camera work became hectic. The atmosphere inside the cabin changed almost instantly. Just moments earlier, everyone had been celebrating. But now there was panicked confusion. The pilot now appeared to be struggling to find the location of the wedding venue. They were now, to all intents and purposes, flying blind. In the final moments of the recording, the helicopter began to lose control. Voices raised, the panic spread, and then it all came to an end. At the wedding venue, guests were already waiting. Nearly 300 people had gathered. The groom stood at the altar. Time passed, but the bride would never appear. Soon, the pastor received devastating news. The helicopter had crashed just a short distance from the venue. The time of all 4 people on board came to an end instantly. There's a particular kind of despair that rarely gets talked about. It's not the despair of a crime itself, but a specific type of despair that comes afterwards. When someone commits an atrocity, they didn't just exist in isolation in a vacuum. They came from somewhere. They had parents, families, people who raised them, people who once held them as babies, who comforted them as little kids when they scraped their knees. And when the truth finally drops on them like a lead weight to the chest, those parents are left staring at someone that they thought they knew, trying to reconcile the child that they raised with the person that the world now sees. I am about to read to you some of the words that those parents said after a tragedy, after their child did the unthinkable, a complete collapse of their reality. These are the words of Bill McVeigh, father of Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, who had 168 victims. At times, I don't know how to express myself. I know what I want to say, but it doesn't come out right. How can you forgive him for ending 168 people? You can't. He's my son, but he did something that was terribly wrong. Sue Klebold, mother of Dylan Klebold, one of the 2 Columbine perpetrators. I had to go through so many phases of accepting this. and accepting, okay, they were there, and okay, they hurt people and it was purposeful, and yes, it was planned, it wasn't impulsiveness, and then the police report, to finally learn that their plan had been to end everyone there, but the plan failed. And when I thought of that, and thought of the magnitude, I really didn't think I was going to live through it. Jens Breivik, father of Anders Breivik, the 2011 Norway attacker, who had 77 victims. I don't feel like his father. How could he stand there and just end so many innocent people, and just seem to think what he did was okay? He should have done it to himself too. That's what he should have done. Peter Roger, father of Elliot Roger, 6 victims. This is the world's horror story. It's when you have somebody who on the outside is one thing and on the inside is something completely different, and you don't see it. Arlene Holmes, mother of James Holmes, the perpetrator of the Aurora movie theatre massacre, he had 13 victims. He said he was having trouble in school. I kept telling him, just keep trying, but I didn't realise that his loudest cry for help was his silence. Amy Laufner, mother of Jared Laufner, 6 victims. Sometimes you'd hear him in his room having conversations, and sometimes he would look like he was having a conversation with someone right there, be talking to someone. I don't know how to explain it. We don't understand why this happened. It may not make any difference, but we wish that we could change the heinous events of Saturday. We care very deeply about the victims and their families. We are so very sorry for their loss. Maribel Rodriguez, mother of Robert Hawkins, the West Roads Mall attacker, 8 victims. It's massive, it's turmoil, it's confusion, it's absolute devastation. I am thinking now that my life is over. There is nothing I can do anymore. What is done is done. Please forgive me, and please forgive my little Robert. These statements showed disbelief with gravitas that's hard to fathom. The person they loved, that they often still love, simply isn't there anymore. And yes, in some cases this was physically, technically correct. I can only imagine it feels like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The person looks the same, but now the soul, the essence of who you thought they were, is gone. Just a facsimile of the original. Before I go, I ask you this. How well can anyone truly know another human being? Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.